Well, hello, everyone. We got this Christmas spirit going here. See if you can see it. You see the lights? They're kind of faint. It lights up on the inside. It's a little bright, but a little bit of red. I don't know how well it shows up. Does anybody have any question that's burning that they'd like to ask today? Hi, Patty. What's new? This blazer. Look at the shoulder pads. It's funny. I think the mic's on for the first time in a while, so that's cool. Hello, Gus. Yeah, this blazer's killing it. That's funny. Oh, appreciate it, Gus. Does anybody have any questions? Hey, Adrian, nice to see you, man. I guess I can get into the theme of the week up to this point has been effortlessness. Oof. There's been a lot of questions about effort and effortlessness, and really one of the most simple pointers that can come along with this is that feeling, just being engaged with sensation, is effortlessness. If we really sit with that, we find that there's nothing we can do when it comes to sensations anyway. We can't actually change them. Just like thoughts, no control, they are here. So just simply being engaged is effortless. And what the mind is constantly telling us is whatever these particular distraction mechanisms are, or whatever other pieces are put into play, that's the norm. That's what the mind is saying. When in fact, that's where the effort seems to be taking place. That's where the manager is being fully interacted with. So effortlessness at its most fundamental is just simply being with what is, of course, and a great space to maybe even engage with what we could even call training wheels, which I know sounds a little trite and trivial, and hopefully that doesn't sound patronizing, but to engage with sensation, to be in deep contact with sensation 24 hours a day, always that attention that's always there, that is effortless. That is effortlessness. That is engagement. That is immersion. And then from there might be some layers. We might start to find bits and pieces of what could feel like shame or some sense of lacking, what Angelo and maybe some other pointers refer to as a fear barrier. Yet it doesn't always show up that way for everyone. It could be just a general sense of sorrow. It can have a more kind of heightened sense of resistance to it as well. That space is ultimately guiding us right to the very core of this. Not that there's a center or a core, yet there seems to be a center, or at least an impetus or a catalyst that is identity. At its most fundamental level, the identity is basically saying, I know I'm real because I feel pain. Here's where it gets kind of interesting. That sense of lacking in shame, whatever that may be, and doesn't have to come with thought, doesn't have to come with narrative, just that general, very strong sense of no, likely a buzzing or a churning or a dropping sensation right behind the navel. That is the same sensation as innocence. Shockingly. It's almost as if the identity's interpretation of innocence is helplessness, and that becomes shame. It's pretty vividly that way. So that's kind of been the theme this week. Not that a week needs a theme, although that's what's seemingly coming up now. Check in with the messages. Supersize good. Thank you for joining. Thank you for all your comments too. Love to hear you speak to nervous tics habits like nail biting, picking skin, touching face. Okay, that's actually a good question. externally, it seems like these particular nervous tics. In fact, I think there's even a syndrome. They call it like nervous tick syndrome. These particular tics are pointing to something to do with the neurological system. Just an overwhelming. It's a self-soothing mechanism, actually, a sense of overwhelm or overstimulation, et cetera, et cetera. The symptoms themselves are just the finger. They're just the shadow of the cave. They're illuminating something else, but they themselves actually aren't a problem. We don't need to engage with those things as a problem. Um, that's the bait. That's basically what it wants you to do, is linger on the surface and attempt to find solutions for things like that. Instead, see what's being illuminated more toward the core. See if there's anything that you can access here in the emotional center, particularly for some reason behind the navel. If there's anything there that seems to be accompanying these particular habits or these behaviors, that's what's being illuminated. Also, certain thoughts tend to arise along with that. It's a self-soothing mechanism, and there's a variety of those. You will see some people chewing their lips, chewing fingernails, rocking motions, and things like that. The symptoms themselves are they're just behaviors to soothe. So what we look for is just briefly check in. What is it that needs to be soothed? And maybe it doesn't have to have a really deep meaning. Maybe it's just a general sense of being overstimulated. Um, Sometimes it's a good idea to just drink a glass of water. I mean, there are some superficial things that can really help here too. When we are caught in our head, we tend not to be very engaged with the body itself in a lot of ways. And this is all about getting into the body, um, at least initially, as a perfect training ground for thisness. The sensations themselves are even a perfect representation of everything else. As is above, so is below. So I would definitely like to explore that a little bit further with you, Adrian, if you'd like. But I think that's ultimately what it is. Is if there's some kind of picking or something like that, then it tends to mean the nervous system is overstimulated, and maybe that is an avoidance mechanism of something that's felt. Could be something else. Let's see. Supersize good. Nice to meet you, Sigurd. Oh, hi, Sigurd. Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining. And just a reminder for everyone, if you are a member on the channel, all of that money is going toward the creation and the funding of a nonprofit organization that is currently in the works. In fact, we are now at finding a lawyer / CPA stage to see what the structure of that particular organization will look like. So it's getting kind of exciting, and maybe around the first of the year we'll have a better idea and be able to have an entire year of being able to help people along the path to awakening, which would be great. See, Greg says, just got out of an ice bath. My favorite place to investigate sensation. Yeah, I mean, here ultimately, if there hasn't been an exploration of the extremes, it's just a good place to look. Wherever it is that we tend not to look is exactly where we really want to be looking. Ultimately, even this in itself, this very feminine aspect of awakening, or it could even be referred to as luminance, this is a stepping away from that which is creating effort in the doership of this more masculine energy of managing this relative reality of forms. I guess that's the best way to put it. Not that they really exist separately, yet in perception, what's appearing now, if there's a sense of surrender is hard, and I hear this a lot. Well, how do I let go? How do I surrender? How do I let things be? And really, the most fundamental pointing here is going to go right back to sensation. To be engaged and entirely immersed in sensation, that is letting go. In a strange way, by being that engrossed with sensation, what starts to happen is the identity sees that we're just fine feeling things that even are initially perceived as difficult, and it no longer has a reason to protect. And when it no longer has a reason to protect, the mechanisms, the thoughts, the constructs therein tend to immediately move into emptiness. That fixation seems to dissolve. And so that's The extremes can be useful. If you are someone that's played with the extremes quite a bit, and maybe you've been bypassing some of the more subtleties, that's where you go. Anything that seems like a pattern or habitual behavior is worthy of investigating what it is outside of that experience, no matter what it is. And really, it's like a fractal. I mean, brush your teeth with the other hand, kind of thing. Change your morning routine if you have a particular routine. Take a different route on the way home from work. Every little aspect is worthwhile to explore just to see what happens. This is another invitation to play. This is another invitation to experiment. And what you might find in the most mundane of these experiences, something profound seems to want to arise there because it lingers anywhere where there's a sense of not going to investigate, not going to look, not going to examine any further. Or we could say a sense of no. Oh, there's Ian. Thanks for joining, Ian. Awesome. Let's see. Let me pull a card first for Adrian. See if we get something new. This one says, "What are you outside of thoughts?" Seems to be the general experience here. What is this outside of thoughts? What are you outside of thoughts? Are you thought? Are you sensation? Can you find a center? The observer is a very powerful place to be. It's not an ending place. And sometimes even the observer can almost feel like a fixated space. Yet ultimately, on the most fundamental level, this is all about noticing, just noticing where attention wants to go. A new metaphor has arisen. It's not very refined, so bear with me. You walk into a deep cave system, you turn off your headlamp, and it's so dark in this space that you're not able to see your hands right directly in front of your space. It's completely, absolutely pitch black. And then out of nowhere, you start to see a green pulsing light on a stalactite up to your upper left. Maybe it's some kind of cave worm or something. Immediately, your attention is drawn to that space. Curiosity, attention, right there, instantly, spontaneously. You didn't have to think about it. It just happens. Your attention is in that space. And then while you're there, you hear a sound maybe over here, a shuffling of some sort. Immediately, your attention moves there. As your attention moves there, you're no longer lingering with the light that you saw here. You're completely here. And while you're there, maybe you feel a droplet of water fall from a stalactite onto the back of your neck, and all of a sudden your attention is here. That's what this can be, very vividly, in that way. To be that close to what is interesting. And what you might find is the mundane that we tend to gloss over, the mundane, these seemingly consistent, regular experiences of our lives, there's a lot of magic there. It's worthwhile to break, explore, or see if there's something else. And inquiry can follow you there. What here is different than what usually makes an appearance? Something along those lines. And ultimately, that can be a sensational inquiry too. What here is telling me that this is only discomfort? What is telling me that there is no pleasure present with this sensation? Sometimes that will open us wide. Just those general senses of inquiry. Ultimately, we will want to let go of the verbal language in the mind of inquiry and just step into there is a sensational value, a pull, almost a magnetism or gravity of curiosity, and that just naturally takes us. It can be in a very rapid way, in fact. And when I say takes us, there's no more sense of us. We're just suddenly the experience itself. And even then, there's no sense of being the experience. It's just the experience. That can be a very vivid step into a profound sense of no self right there, just like that. But it can show up in a variety of ways. These are just pointings, keep in mind. So it doesn't show up just like, it just can show up like this. Having an openness for however it wants to arise is very useful. Whatever this experience is, this unique relative aspect of experience is absolutely unique to each and every one of us. But the identity itself is a collective experience that is overlaying that, convincing us that we're individuals apart. The only aspect of this particular expression and form that's being made as us is quite momentary. And so that's the uniqueness. It seems to be absolutely, absolutely strange and mysterious. I know that can get kind of confusing, but we're not individuals apart. We are an aspect of this connected as just one experience. And when we don't have experiences and appearances showing up as separate things anymore, and it's just this, that's where liberation is often found, right there. All right, Ian. Oh, wait. Before I go to Ian, I'm going to go to Greg since he asked something or mentioned something. Or let's go to Sigurd, actually. This one's for you. Okay, this one's about investigating boundaries and borders, lines, separation. This one says, feel the ends of this location. Pay attention to what the mind does when that particular cue comes up. Feel the ends of this location. Are you attempting to figure out what location means? Are you attempting to figure out and interpret it and have some kind of assumption around that? Or can you just settle into, do you have a sense of where this begins and where this ends? Just this right here, right now. The body, the room you're in, maybe things that seem like separate objects, subject to object. Feel the ends. Can you find that boundary? And if you do find that boundary, zoom in a little bit. Get so close that you can find the finest aspect of that line. Maybe, metaphorically on an atomic level, can you get down to the atoms that seem to be separate or apart? That will help absolute engagement with this. Zooming in can be absolute engagement, and zooming out can start to reveal fixations. If you haven't seen the video, Zoom in, zoom out, it covers that a little bit more with inquiry as well. All right. Greg, I'll grab you one. Let's see. This one's good. This one's more of a pointer about identity. Another way this shows up is to say, when we start to see the machine, the patterns, the mechanisms of identity, and we start to see them really clearly, we begin to see there's nothing there at all. And this one says, to identify identity is to see nothing there. It's just another way to put that. There's no singular way to approach this. Ultimately, it will be so spontaneous and intuitive and new that it probably won't be comparable to anyone else's experience, at least on an immersed level. If we zoom out, it will probably seem similar to other people's experiences in awakening. Don't get caught up in that story. Get so close to the spontaneity of this experience, the immediacy of this experience, that it shows up however it's going to show up. And it's going to be unpredictable. You won't be able to prepare around it. And sometimes you won't even be able to tell a story around it. You won't have much memory. That's how it goes. All right. Let's see. Sitzel, yes, thank you. Let's see. How to deal with others' pain and anger. Well, the first piece of that is to recognize that almost all identity is some kind of expression of pain. Wherever their pain seems to be, on a very relative level, it absolutely has nothing to do with us. No matter, even if they're pointing out particular aspects of a narration or story or certain actions that we did, their pain is their pain. Their expression of pain is their expression of pain. That's one level. The second level is something more primary, is that it seems that we are just purely curious, innocent, and compassionate at our core, our truest nature. And to meet people exactly where they are is to be with that experience so completely that we are able to feel that with them, while also practicing no narration, no thought, watching those thoughts, and just being immersed in the sensations. That doesn't necessarily mean we take on pain. It's difficult to say that if we feel individualized pain or somehow there's an energetic signature that we can also feel. But I guess it doesn't really matter, because if we don't know what it is and we don't have a value on it and there's no preference, then it's actually pretty easy to sit with. So it's tricky. In this relative world of reality, we want to have boundaries. Boundaries are less of a wall, more of a doorway with people. And at the same time, how much can we sit with whatever seems to be showing up? How fully can we be engaged with the storm as it seems to be going through? To meet people where they are is to simply be entirely with them, regardless of their pain and anger. And I know that can spill over in a relative way. So, this is where we start to tap into intuition. It's not one thing or another, that's for sure. Sometimes a boundary just arises on its own, and then that boundary is put into place, and then we move. It's its own momentum. Other times, to sit entirely with someone while they're pointing the finger, if there is no resistance, there's a teaching there in a way, a demonstration. And if somebody keeps pointing the finger, eventually that finger turns, especially if there's no resistance. It turns back here, and then insights can be gleaned for people. So, by no means am I saying that it's wise to handle and deal with abuse and be abused. Yet at the same time, what does it seem to be triggering in ourselves to see somebody else in pain or see somebody else dealing with anger? And is that something we want to avoid? Because regardless, we can be absolutely still no matter what the situation seems to entail. All right. This one says, there is no process. And I know it can vividly feel like there's a process, but sometimes that becomes a pretty intense fixation. And if that means there's a process, there always has to be a process. But there is absolute cessation here. This all seems to cease. So the most direct pointing there is there's no process. Be with what's happening now. Don't be invested in it's coming or it's something that's showing up next. That is still a removal of presence. And to meet you where you are, if there feels like a process, then that's the truth that seems to be arising. You still have to be with that all the way. You be with everything until it seems to make another appearance or an expression. That's what curiosity can show us. Sometimes these layers peel quickly. There's a lot of contradictions on this path. All right. I find myself imagining scenarios of telling my friends about awakening enlightenment. It feels like a distraction. What options do I have to disrupt the pattern? Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is notice that those are just thoughts. Fantasies, all those things are thought oriented. And, using the allegory of the cave, Plato's cave, every thought is the shadow on the wall. There might be a partial truth to it, but it's representative of something being illuminated here now. So, whenever those things come up, what does it seem to be pointing to? Can you detect something sensationally? Maybe there's even lower level thoughts that it's pointing to. Sometimes the finger points to another finger, but ultimately that points to the moon. Ultimately, that's probably pointing to a sense of lacking to tell your friends there's a validation there. And it's a very, very fundamental, almost primitive survival mechanism for us to be validated, to have a sense of conformity and acceptance. What is telling you that you need that? What is telling you that that's necessary? Some of the best parts of this is when there's just silence. Truly, it makes sense why some monks take a vow of silence. Even having this YouTube channel, sometimes it just occurs that there's absolutely nothing to say. And even during sessions, sometimes it's just really quiet, unless a direct question is asked. What would it be to be absolutely silent? Wouldn't be necessarily a secret, but we can't really talk about this anyway. We're speaking of nothing. And unfortunately, the more words we use, the cheaper it tends to get. We get close, they're all fingers pointing to something, yet it's tricky that way. Enlightenment is for no one else. In fact, it is so inherently personal on one level. That's where that inverse space of flipping inside out seems to happen. It's so inherently instantaneous and immediate that doesn't really matter what anybody else's perception is. I've even had people on the channel say something along the lines of, I could tell he hasn't had any experience with awakening because of his face. So Here, I don't have much of an awakened face, apparently. It doesn't matter. The only way to answer any of those questions is yes, because whatever the experience is, there's no point in attempting to reject anyone's experience. Um, Whatever that seems to be, the answer is yes. If there isn't resonance here in some way, then this message isn't for you. And that's not to say that you're left out. That's just to say that it's just not resonating. If it's not resonating, then there's apparently no value. That's perfectly okay. This is why when we do one-on-ones, upon sending an email, there's always a section that's in there that says, if for some reason this doesn't feel like it's organic or working, I will help you find another teacher, because the teacher should never be a barrier. And teacher, loosely, pointer is probably a better term for that. So just pay attention to when that mechanism shows up. Likely it's pointing to something that feels like lacking, feels like shame. And right there is where you will discover something. See if you can detect a sensation. All right, let me pull you a card. This one's good. This one shows up often enough, yet it doesn't seem to have a limit of how often it can be expressed. Say, feel, I don't know, I don't need to know. That was one of the very first insights that showed up after meeting Angelo. It was there were a lot of people that wanted to share books and teachers and have YouTube videos watched, and there was just a very visceral sense of not needing it, and that felt like freedom. When before there was kind of an addiction to knowledge, there was clearly a need to know a lot of things, and for some reason, that's what was starting to arise. So sometimes just having that sense every once in a while, or maybe turning it into inquiry. Do I need to know? What will the knowledge bring? Those kinds of things. Knowledge itself tends to be at least muting, but often the death of curiosity itself. Move away from knowledge for a little bit. Move away into something that's more direct and unpredictable. And you might start to see that knowledge is often a refuge utilized for protection. I don't know. I don't need to know. It's actually pretty free to say I don't know. A lot of freedom in I don't know. All right. Yuva wants a card. This one's another boundary investigation. This one says, where is the end? And that can show up in a lot of ways. Does it feel like you're going to get somewhere? Does it feel like you're going to attain something? You're going to get something out of this? It's really not how it works. In fact, that's the obscuration itself. If there needs to be a leg to stand on or a platform to reach, that's pointing to something. There's a finger right there. It's pointing to a sense of lacking still. I don't have it. How do you know you don't have it? How do you know it's not here? Investigate that. Where's the end? Is there an end? You can ask the inverse too. Where's the beginning? Is there a beginning? That can be useful inquiry as well. All right, Sigurd, nice to see you. Ryan, how you doing? Thanks for joining. Let's see, Josh, I think I've heard you say that you only need 4 hours of sleep per night. How much did you need before awakening? Is it common for liberated or even awakened people to need less sleep? I have no idea sleeping habits really. I mean, it would just have to be a guess. Here, it's an average of 4 hours. It does fluctuate, just depending. Before awakening, I could not seem to get enough sleep. I always had a sense of being tired. 8 hours, 10 hours, just didn't seem like I could just sleep more and more and more. I'm not sure what the change is. Somebody brought it up the other day, and this is just relative, and this is just a story, that the brain consumes 25% of the calories of the body, and maybe there's just a lot less management happening, and so it's just not consuming as many calories. No idea. But I don't really know about. I wish I could answer that question. Something I can definitely ask Angelo and Alma and Eshwar if their sleeping had changed at all. But yeah, it's about 4 hours a night. And like upon waking up, there's not a sense of, oh, something's wrong or something's missing. It's just immediate engagement. And sometimes there's a very visceral tingling sensation somewhere. Sometimes it feels like the body is just, it's a strange feeling, but it feels like I'm being assembled, like little by little, like fading into existence. There's even been some really visceral feelings of being something completely different, like, I don't know, like a little animal or something, or an inanimate object upon having a sense of consciousness from waking up. I don't know what it is or what it means. It's just kind of how it shows up here, and maybe that's common, maybe it's not. I don't. We haven't really had that conversation, although that question is a good question because maybe that's something I can ask some people in interviews. All right, let's. This one's pretty good. All right, this one says, "What cannot be felt?" I don't even think that one needs any more words. All of this touching. And it might not show up as a body sensation. That's all. But it's felt. There's no other way to describe that. That's nice, Patty. All right. Let's see, Gus. How do you naturally keep the ball rolling on presence? Lately, my effortful drive to attune to presence, inquiry, etc., has dropped, but I've noticed presence has seemed to actually rise less. There's a belief there. Presence doesn't arise. Presence just is. It's something else is arising as an appearance that might be over presence. The ball rolling on it's always there. That's why this can be tricky, because the mind is always needing something to attain, or a cause and effect, or an origin, which it's oriented completely around a sense of separation. If there's a sense that presence is a separate experience, we can call this like the two worlds experience, or the sanctuary experience. There's no sanctuary. There are not two worlds. It's always just been presence. I would highly, highly point to check out what's going on in the body. If there's ever a sense that there's not presence, there's likely an overlay and an effort against something that's being felt. It's a very strong compass. And until those particular mechanisms have kind of peeled away and stopped working so hard, it will continue to seemingly show up as this oscillation, a desert of experience, nothing seemingly happening, and then vivid experiences, kind of like this oscillation back and forth. So once again, that's another powerful finger. It's pointing to something. It itself is pointing. Life itself is pointing. Thoughts themselves are pointing. It all belongs. It's all here. It's all this. What is it pointing to? Something that's not being engaged with. So if there's a sense that presence is difficult to attune to, there's probably some bypassing in the physical sensational space. Check in with that and just see what shows up. That tends to be the case. It isn't always the case, but check in. There's always a pretty strong sense that something wants to be bypassed in the body. And, looking at ancient traditions, it seems like people live a lot differently now than they did thousands of years ago. And maybe people during that period of time were much more engaged with the body, but not engaged with other senses. And maybe that's why some pointings of more ancient traditions point to moving away from the body and into just pure presence. Ultimately, we still seem to exist in this relative form. Or as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, as an addendum to the Heart Sutra, is there is no being and there is no non-being. There's still a nose. So there is no part of this that we ignore or reject. And it seems like the most common thing that we are bypassing and rejecting is bodily sensations. And then what we're doing is we're putting assumptions, or we're allowing the mind to put assumptions and interpretations over that experience and labeling them as something we don't like. And that colors the experience. And it kind of puts us in this feedback loop. So presence itself can be felt. That's the only way to describe it. You can feel presence. So check in to see if there's something that doesn't want to be felt, and that will likely give you pretty powerful clues to presence. And here's the thing. If the first thing that shows up is a sense of resistance or avoidance, we don't gloss over that and go to, okay, I'm going to move past this to presence. That's what's arising. Be with that. What makes you so sure it's resistance? What makes you so sure it's avoidance? That immediately, whatever it is. There's nothing else. We could just say the first thing that's felt is the only thing is everything. And not even as a laboratory or removed. It is literally everything. You're feeling everything all the time. From what I've seen in interviews, it seems extremely common for liberated people to not need sleep. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's needed, but it definitely doesn't seem to show up very often. Yeah, I don't know. I'll ask Angelo. I've never had that conversation. There will be an interview coming up with Frank Yang. Now that you mentioned Frank Yang, in looks like early January. So that'll be pretty interesting and fun. Maybe I'll ask him there about sleep. All right, I'll pull you a card. This one's good too. This one is where it starts to kind of play with shame. Notice regret, notice guilt, notice these particular judgments. Every external judgment is pointing inward. An external judgment is reflecting something here. It's all a finger to the moon of what seems to be shame. This one says, it's just a judgment. It has no meaning. It's just a judgment. It has no meaning. And that's it. All right, I'm reading a little bit. Fun fact, professional chess players often lose up to 6,000 calories playing chess, so mental activity can definitely physical energy. Yeah. It feels like here's what's interesting. There's seemingly an intellect intact. It seems to be what puts words together, yet it feels entirely like a faceless tool is the best way to put it. Driving with my daughter, taking her to school the other day, we passed a woman walking a dog, and she immediately asked, "What kind of dog is that?" And it was almost like data retrieval. It was like, and then it showed up. There was like an image and a word, Keishand. And she's like, "You just made that up." And I'm like, "Yeah, probably." It felt intuitive. It felt absolutely intuitive and spontaneous. And she's like, "Well, we should look it up on Google." So I get on the phone, I look it up, and it was Keishand. But it didn't feel like there was any effort behind the information, and it didn't feel like there's anything that was actually known either. That's another thing, is it felt entirely random, like it just came out of the ether, just like other aspects of intuition. So not really sure about that phenomena, but that's a really good way to describe what it is to have certain thoughts when it comes to information, I suppose. Hi, Rain. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to do a quick check-in. My time. And we're good. Okay. I'm going to pull one more card, and we will be done for this live. Let me see if I can get these lights to work again. I don't know how visible you can kind of see them. All right, all right. This one moves more into a koan. This one asks, what is the cause of nothing? See if you sit with that. See if answers arise. See if it leads to a vacuum of thought. Oh, I'm going to answer one more question since Rain jumped in. My question is, I struggle with questions. I come to who, where am I? And my response is everything. And where do I go from there? Okay, so this is part of the caveat when it comes to inquiry. Sometimes what happens is inquiry becomes an intellectual exercise, and so it can become a fixation. Not always. Sometimes it can. And it can be really useful to move outside of formal inquiry in order to kind of break that up with maybe we return at some point to formal inquiry. So if you're sitting in who am I, where am I, and it's just showing up as everything, that's a negotiation happening with the identity and thoughts. It's not going any deeper. So there's two ways to play with this. You can take the answer for every inquiry and bring up a natural inquiry about that. What is everything? And then maybe the answer comes up nothing. What is nothing? And maybe the answer comes up as everything. that would be a loop. If that's the case, it's probably best to break up that type of inquiry and move into something else. Here, the pointing is pretty much consistently, it seems, pointing towards sensations. When everything shows up, is there a sensation that is also present when everything arises? I think what you'll start to find is there's very low level thoughts that like to linger. We can call those whispers. And the sensational space, we could even say there's shadow work. It doesn't really seem to fit any one particular aspect of this in terms of a practice, but sitting with the sensations deeply, you will begin to find that certain thoughts are lingering quietly and they can get regurgitated into the conscious mind. And once that happens, you start to see things a lot more clearly, because the whole point of this is discomfort makes the mechanism desperate. And so see if you can find where there might be some discomfort there. Not that you want to necessarily search it out or create it, but chances are, if there's a sense of comfort with who am I, where am I, and the answer is everything, or something along those lines, you can also mix up the inquiry, but also check in with the sensational space. Stillness ultimately is complete awareness of what's happening in a sensational space, and also being able to watch thought. And sometimes inquiry will kind of back us into a corner. And so there's other things we can do in that regard. For that type of experience, I highly recommend stepping into something a lot more spontaneous. Even getting into something externally that brings up a sense of discomfort or feels like a hell no can also be really valuable. This is one of the reasons that improv classes tend to arise as a recommendation here, because really this all seems to be improvisation. Improv is like a micro representation of what all of this is. Pretty spontaneous, pretty random, really can't be strategized around. That's where you want to go. It's a place where you start to feel helpless, outside of control, a place where you can't strategize, a place where you cannot plan. And there might be sensations that don't feel very safe or comfortable along the way. But just remember, they're just sensations. They don't mean anything. Yeah, beautiful. I'm so grateful for everyone. I'm going to pull one more card and then we'll be done. Here's a Rumi quote. The cure for the pain is in the pain. Wherever it feels like it hurts, that's where the message is. Not that there's any wanting of you to hurt. The pointing here is that you already do. And get in touch with that. It's already there. Know it all the way. Know everything as completely as possible until there's really nowhere left to discover. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. And we might do another live before the holidays. If not, though, blazer intact. Merry Christmas or happy holidays or whatever you celebrate. Or if you don't, just, happy snuggle wintertime for you. And thank you, everyone, for joining me today. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.